Hi, can you,
Hi, can
am
you
I on,
talk now?
am I on your screen?
Yes, yes. Can you see me?
I can indeed.
Okay. How are you today?
I'm good. Where are you calling from, Chuck?
I'm Dallas, Texas,
Okay,
and you're in New York,
I
correct?
am in New York.
How
I
are
think
things?
I need my glasses for this.
How are things today?
Sure.
Well, I wanted to first of all thank you so much for writing such a great book. It is absolutely terrific. I could show you the pages. I have highlighted every page and every word
Well,
practically.
that's an honor to a writer. Thank you.
Tell me how you got started with the idea of writing that.
Okay, I actually did not have in mind the idea of writing a book. What I was doing at the time, so goes back to 2002. I was here at Psychology Today, but I was also putting out a newsletter on depression, Blues Buster. And I got wind of the fact that rates of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-mutilation, binge drinking were skyrocketing on college campuses. So I began investigating that, and I discovered that since the 1990s, rates of these disorders had really been going up very dramatically. And so I turned over an entire issue of the newsletter to reporting on it. And 2 years later, I went back to all my sources. There were over 400 of them at colleges and universities all across the country, and discovered that the phenomenon had only gotten worse. And again, I turned over an entire issue of the newsletter to that. And then I began asking, well, why? And all of my sources, all 400 of them, said the same thing, that the kids have no coping skills because their parents have taken all the lumps and bumps out of life for them to make sure that the kids succeed on the soccer field or in the academic arena. And in taking all the lumps and bumps out of life, the kids had no challenges. And of course, it's through challenges that you develop skills, that you learn how to cope, that you learn your particular best way of coping with things. And then lacking coping skills, these kids fall apart when they hit a little speed bump. A minor thing that wouldn't upset any other human being at an earlier time could send these kids into spiraling into a depression. And to me, that was amazing because I have two sons, and they graduated from college not long before this. And I don't think they even knew where the campus counseling center was. So this was a very rapid change in a very short period of time.
What do you think caused the shift?
Oh, okay.
Was it
Then I asked the question, okay, what is it? It's this lack of coping skills, and that led me to do an article in the magazine called A Nation of Wimps. And now it looked at how these kids have a constant running conversation with their parents. And this was a big change because cell phones, cell phones were the fastest adopted technology ever. In maybe the year 2000, maybe they had a 30% penetration on college campuses. By the year 2003, cell phones had just taken over. It was like 95% penetration. When it's 30% penetration, that's not a big deal. But the switch to 95%, everybody had a cell phone. Everybody was communicating by cell phone. And essentially what happens when you have a cell phone is that mom and dad go off to college with you. They're in your front pocket or wherever you keep your cell phone. These kids are on the phone to mom and dad, 20 times a day. And having their parents solve every problem for them, from what to order in the cafeteria to how to approach a teacher when they feel that they didn't do very well on an exam or a paper. And they had their parents coaching them, constantly.
Were the parents getting some type of reward as a parent for doing that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of complicated. Yes, for some reason or other, I think that parents are living more through their children, getting more of their rewards from their kids' accomplishments these days. I think that's something fairly new. Parents always took pride in their kids and their kids' accomplishment, but this is beyond it. The parents have more of a psychological and emotional investment in how the kids do. Now, part of it has to do with their own marital relationships. And there's some evidence from studies that were done in Belgium, notably, that parents who had less wonderful marital relationships were particularly prone to living through their children. So in an era when you have tremendously high expectations of relationships and perhaps your own relationship isn't meeting those standards, you're going to be especially prone to living through your child. I think that the parents are living through the kids, getting their joys from their kids' accomplishments, and not developing lives of their own. Their own social lives are not phenomenally well developed, and lots of studies show that parents do less in terms of their own socializing. So everything becomes focused on the kids. And more is riding on what their kids do. And I think that's a heavy burden to put on the kids. I think kids know that they're at bat. It's their turn up to influence the culture, to prepare, and then to influence the culture and make their mark on society. I don't think they need that extra burden of, is my mother going to be happy or depressed, depending on what I do. I just think that kids normally know that their parents are interested. I just don't think they need that extra sense that they're carrying their parents' mental health on their back with their own performance.
Well, as I've told you, I'm a coach and work with many, many kids, and I've seen over the years, I still believe kids are kids.
Right.
But I have seen the fact that they have a lot more pressure. They don't feel a sense of failure. They're scared of failure now, and scared of persevering through a problem.
Right. They don't
Did you
know
research
how to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. Where did that fear come from? From pleasing their parents?
Yes. I mean, if you constantly require that your child perform well to please you, that child's sense of self is going to be riding on parental approval. That's a pretty rotten way to live, let me tell you. First of all, it creates perfectionism. And you're constantly living in fear of failure. Now, let me just say that it's really important to fail, and it's important to fail early, because one of the messages you get from failing early is, A, I can make a course correction, and B, wow, I can fail and recover.
Yes.
And that's a very important lesson to learn. If you don't learn that till you're 25, you're terrified of failing. And what happens is you're focused on avoiding something. So you're mentally negatively focused. And that's very depressing, to be mentally negatively focused. And of course, because you're anxious, it inhibits performance. I'm sure you see this all the time.
Yes, so they withdraw. They'd rather not compete.
Right.
And not fail.
Right. And the other thing is, I'm sure you have the experience of their parents calling you and telling you how to play and give their kid more field time and play time and things like that.
Absolutely. And people I've talked to now, it's filtered up to the college level. when I was in college, would have never thought of my parents calling. They would have not known who to call in college. Do you see that in your research, that they're contacting professors, deans, or coaches at college level?
Absolutely. I mean, and the parents are pretty shameless about it because they call all hours of the day or night. And yes, my parents were barely involved in my college education. My parents are college educated themselves. So it isn't as if they didn't know the ropes. They just would never have dreamed of interfering. But I had a wonderful experience. One of the first places I was asked to speak after my article came out, and it was after the article that I was dragooned into writing the book, which I love doing, by the way. But I wasn't prepared to write a book. That's why I say dragooned into it. But after the article came out, the article came out in December of 2004, I was invited to speak at Notre Dame. Now, is there a school that has a bigger sports program than Notre Dame University? And is there a person held in higher regard than the athletic director of the university? I felt like I was talking to God. So I was invited out to Notre Dame to speak. It was faculty day. I was the featured speaker. And there were all of these people in the audience, the head of the business school, the head of the law school, and the athletic director. And they were a wonderful audience. They were very attentive. And the first person to ask me a question after my talk was the athletic director. He really fed me a fascinating piece of information. And he told me that his job was really hampered by the fact that parents were constantly calling. And he solved the problem by telling, the parents were calling, giving him, he's the coach, he's the head of it all. And they're telling him how to play their child, when to play their child, when to put the kid into the game. And he had a rule, and he spoke to his teams, and he told them, if your parent calls, you're benched. That was very effective in putting an end to the parents calling and giving directives to the kids or to the university on how to play the kids. But one of the very next places I went to speak was at a very large private school in California, in Los Angeles, a very well-to-do private school. And this is important because the school was able, because it was well endowed, it was able to put on and cast 4 major shows a year in their theater program. Now, that's more than most schools do. So it meant that there were 4 big casting calls. And it meant that the theater director, each time he cast a show or a play, was inundated with calls from parents telling him, just as they had told the athletic director, they gave their kid too small a role, the kid needs a bigger role, the kid was cast for the wrong part. All the parents basically giving directions to the theater head, telling him how to run his program. And he basically had to have the same solution as came to by himself, a similar solution to the athletic director at Notre Dame. And I think that there are heads of programs at various places, even at private paying schools, where there are teachers and leaders who are empowered enough to tell the paying parents enough, step back, we know something about your kids, we audition them, and every time you're out on the field playing a game, basically you're auditioning, and we're skilled at making judgments on how to play them and what roles to put them in. And not every school has faculty or administration that feels strong enough to put up the resistance to parents. But the parents can really be very invasive.
Well, can you talk about, you in your book you talk, and the audience that's going to be listening to this, I'm going to recommend that they all get this book and give a link to go get it, because it, like I said, it's been a reference manual for me. It's fabulous. Right. But you talk about hothouse parents.
Right.
Could you explain a little bit about hothouse parents for those that don't know?
Sure.
The concept.
Right. What hothouse parents, think of a hothouse, a greenhouse, where plants are raised in this very rarefied environment, protected from the elements, coddled, watered regularly, usually by automatic systems, and in an environment that doesn't admit any adversity. And of course, many of these plants, over a couple of generations, can't thrive in the wild. And I use that as a metaphor for the way these children are being raised. They're being given these overprotected environments. As I said, all the minor challenges of life are taken away from them. They're not allowed to stumble. And the path is cleared for them so they can do well on the soccer field or the academic field. And so the hothouse is basically the rarefied environment that's cultured and in which no natural forces are allowed to exert themselves. And the intense monitoring that these children receive, just as the plants in a hothouse are intensely monitored all the time. And while you can get the plant to grow, what you're essentially doing is you're narrowing the ability of that child to adapt to whatever conditions there are. And if there is one thing that marks our humanity, all you have to do is look at the earth and see how diverse populations are, the diverse places we live, the diverse ways we've solved the problems of living in the environments we inhabit. And the one thing you come away knowing is that adaptability is our great human strength. And parents are taking that away from their children.
That's a scary thought.
It is. I agree.
It's a scary thought, because now I see, and this is one thing that I'm extremely concerned about, is the amount of medication that children are taking. And you can find a disorder for just about anything.
Well, and they do. This is the thing that amazes me, Chuck. When my kids were growing up, and I don't want to use myself as a touchstone, so let's not use me as a reference point, because I don't want to make it seem like, oh, I was a perfect mom and I did everything perfectly. That is not the case at all, although I have two very healthy grown sons who are very happily and healthily raising their own kids, little kids now. But there was a time, not very long ago, when parents were proud of the fact that the kids were happy and healthy and growing normally with the normal, breaking bones and all kinds of things that you have during childhood. If your kid is active, one of the things we must absolutely understand is that all of life involves risk. Movement involves risk. Non-movement involves probably greater risk, but it plays out over a longer period of time. Parents are dedicated, so you don't see it immediately. Parents are dedicated to removing risk from the life of their kids. At the same time, this is so ironic, they are willing to have their kids labeled with these awful kinds of disorders, and they actually willingly seek them out. And one of the reasons they do is because it allows them accommodations in school, which essentially comes down to, academically, what it comes down to is that the kids are allowed to take tests untimed, and so that at the end of what I call at the end of the rainbow, they can take the big test untimed, the SAT, and do well because they're taking it with no time constraints. This is a sea change where we're rewarding and seeking vulnerability instead of being proud of our strengths. I find this extremely troubling. I have to tell you that.
Extremely. And your research showed how much of an increase we've had in the last 10 years in prescription medication for young people. And I was astonished by that.
Right. And the numbers, of course, are even higher. Although lately there's been kind of a turnaround because there's been so much negative publicity about the effects of drugs on kids and the linking of, let's say, antidepressants with suicides. There's been a leveling off in the prescribing of these drugs. But parents are seeking ways to make their kids tractable. Instead of being parents and maybe allowing their kids some more time outside running around and being active, what they want is they want to protect their kids, they want to monitor the environment, and then by taking away all of the natural activities the kids have, they actually prefer their kids being indoors and playing video games sometimes. But one of the things it does is it changes kind of the behavior of kids. It has implications for the behavior of kids. And it can make kids restless and irritable. And then parents seek to, instead of seeking the natural remedy and allowing kids to play, what parents do is they seek to have their kids diagnosed and then given drugs and made tractable so that they'll be receptive to all of the parental invasiveness. It's a really very pernicious, negative cycle, and I don't think it's good for the kids. I think it's terrible for the kids. I think it's terrible for the parents. I think it's terrible for the future of democracy and the future of the economy. Because one of the things that the future of the economy demands is that you be able to take risks. And these kids are being deprived of the opportunity to take risks. They're learning to avoid failure. And inherent in taking risks is the possibility of failure. And when you fail early, you learn that you can overcome that, you can start again, you can course correct, and if that doesn't work, you can start again. But if these kids are terrified of failure, they're just not going to go down the track of innovation and creativity. They're just learning to be good little performers to meet their parental standards.
And you also talk about the importance of play. And you touched on that, but could you elaborate a little bit more? You even mentioned in your book some universities that have instituted specialists in helping those students learn how to play.
Right. I mean, isn't it pathetic that we live in a world where we have to teach kids how to play?
Absolutely.
Play is a natural instinct. Actually, if you were to leave kids alone on their own for a while, they really would play. But they're being deprived of so many opportunities to play. And play, of course, it's just a wonderful thing. To parents who are hell-bent on having their kids perform, whether it's on the soccer field or in academia, play looks like a waste of time. But play is anything but. Play actually fosters nimbleness, mental dexterity, and it in fact stimulates the growth of nerve cells and new nerve connections in the brain. So parents have no idea what they're talking about when they deprive kids of play. Play is what builds healthy, smart brains. And there are studies that show that within 30 minutes after playing, all kinds of genes for nerve cell growth are turned on in the brain.
But is play considered sitting on a computer playing a video game?
That's not my idea of play. For some parents, it is. And the reason parents sometimes prefer that is because then the parent, has control and knows where the child is. Woven into all of this, and often given as the excuse for this over-monitoring kids and not allowing them outdoors to play. I'm sure, Chuck, when you were a kid, and I do that whenever I speak to parents, I do a certain exercise with them. I ask them to close their eyes and to think of their happiest moments when they were a child. And almost invariably, they tell me their happiest moments were when they came home from school or on days when they weren't in school. They got on a bike, went off with their friends, rode off somewhere, and never came back till it was after dark. Parents didn't know where they were. And these were their happy moments. And no one ever felt threatened or in danger. And now parents manufacture, and I'll explain that in a moment, the threat of stranger danger or of all kinds of kidnapping and other threats out there. The fact of the matter is, yes, in some areas, road traffic has increased, but that's not true of all areas. And more people have moved out into areas where there's a lot less road traffic. But the fact of the matter is we live in a much safer world, despite the school shooting. We live in a much safer world than we used to live in. And this isn't me. This isn't some opinion. If you look at Department of Justice data over the past 20 years, you will see that all forms of harm to children have gone down. Kids are far less at risk of abuse, of kidnapping, of all kinds of threats than they ever were before. And not only are child problems at a lower rate than they've ever been, but the associated kinds of problems are down, so that domestic violence is down. The things that normally travel with danger to children are also down. So that gives the experts confidence in the numbers, and in they're able to believe that the statistics are really true, that you have a number of measures in which the dangers of children, either directly or in their environment, are down. So kids live in a safer world. Parents act as if it's a more dangerous world. They use that as an excuse to protect them, monitor them, and keep them tied to the parents.
So are parents parenting out of fear?
Oh, yes. Parents are definitely working out of fear. And, this to me is also a novel thing, that it's a fear, and it's a fairly widespread fear, because they don't trust nature. They don't trust childhood to take a natural course, that their kids will do fine if they're left a little bit more alone. And when I mean left alone, physically left a little more alone, and the monitoring cut back. Parents don't trust that kids left to their own devices would be able to follow their own curiosity, would do anything well. I know people who grew up on a farm, and kids who grow up on farms, those of us who live in cities and grew up in urban environments, At least for me, at first I found this very hard to believe. But we hear about kids who live on farms and they're up at 5 in the morning and they're milking the cows and they're doing all these things. And all we can think of is, oh my God, these poor kids. Well, it turns out these poor kids love what they're doing. And they do it voluntarily very often. And why do they love what they're doing? Because, guess what? It gives them a fabulous opportunity to demonstrate their competence. And they love doing that. They love knowing that they're good at something. They love knowing that what they're doing is helping the family unit or in some way contributing. And they get a great sense of themselves for being able to contribute in this way. So getting up at 5 in the morning for them is something that has great pluses, whereas those of us who live in urban environments think of it only as, oh my God, these poor kids.
Yes. And it's ironic that in every weight room in America, they have a sign that says no pain, no gain. And that's pretty much the way with parenting. If those kids don't have some pain while they're under your tutelage, then how are they going to be able to handle it when they get out in life? Because as we all know, you're going to have it at some point in time.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're living in fear of it, you're going to do everything to avoid it. Whereas if you encounter some pain and some challenge early on, you're going to seek it out. You're going to say, hey, this is no big deal. A, I can master it. And B, if I don't, I can always figure out something as I go along. Now, that's another really important point, that within challenge is necessary for a whole lot of reasons, but a reason we haven't yet discussed yet, Chuck, is that challenge is very important for kids because, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, it is the predecessor to happiness. Now, if there's one thing that all parents say they want, I want my child to be happy. Well, guess what? Happiness isn't something you can just pursue. It's a byproduct. And there are studies of how the brain operates that show that people are at their happiest and least likely to be depressed when they are in the state of mastering a challenge in that last final sprint toward their goal. Before they've achieved it, it's in sight, they're not quite sure that they can reach it, they're mustering all of their resources for that last final sprint. That is when the brain is in its most positive state and when it's turned off all kinds of negative feeds into the brain. So happiness is a state achieved as a result of challenge. You ask any CEO and they will tell you that the happiest times in their life were not as CEO, but it was in the challenge to get there.
That is a great point. You talk about the different challenges that parents have today. How much is the media playing into these fears that we have? And you're involved in the media, but how much are the negative images, like the shooting last week, and which was such a tragic event? But now I see people are so afraid of their kids even going to school, so they're passing that fear on to their children.
Right. There was a time not very long ago that, you see, I think you've hit on something that's really a very important change. It is that because parents today have this fusion of identity with their children, they not just get their pleasure from their kids, they over-identify with their kids. So there's no boundary between them and their kids. They pass on all of their emotions, their fears particularly. And I personally think that fear comes with parenting. I personally think that all parents have fears about their kids, their health, their safety. I don't think it's our job to pass on our fears to our kids. I think there are times you bite your tongue. I think that there are times when you don't lie to your kids, but I think that you do restrain yourself. And you don't pass on every single one of your anxieties. Oh, I'm afraid of this. The first time your kid rides a bike, you're afraid that the kid is going to fall and isn't going to make it. Do you tell that to your kid? No. Hey, you can make it from this tree to that bench. Let's see you do that. You display confidence so you can give the kid confidence. I think parents have a big role in helping their kids, because the kids themselves have enough concerns about whether they're ready to make that next step and whether they can take on the challenges. And I think it's parents' job to help their children understand, by knowing their kids, when they're ready for that next step and that next spurt of growth, in challenge and things that they can do. And it's parents' job to spur the kids on. You see birds doing this. You see birds going out, teaching their little fledglings how to fly. And they move ever so adeptly further and further out on the limb of a tree, holding a worm as a reward for their little bird to fly that distance. And that's how they teach them. So they're encouraging them. They're not 2 inches away and saying, oh, you can't do this, so I better be right here. You don't pass on all of your anxieties. You pass on some encouragement and confidence in your kid, because that's how your kid gets it.
Now, let me ask you about that, because you just mentioned, let's say a project, and you say, oh, well, you can't do that. Let me do it. What damage does that? What damage did your research find that did?
Well, it just totally infantilizes kids. Now, look, we all know you have a 5-year-old, and it's going to be a lot faster for the parent to tie the kid's shoelaces when you're going out. We all know that. But you have to bite your tongue, and your kid has to learn how to tie his own shoelaces to know that he can do it. You see, being able to do it is more than just being able to do it. What happens is, once you're able to do it, you gain the confidence that you can do it. And that confidence is like a magic shield. It's a great thing to have, because that confidence spurs you to take on more challenges, more tasks, more things to do. And it gives you the confidence, yeah, I can master this. So it's that sense of mastery that's really the magic shield. So every time you tie your kid's shoelaces for your kid, you're depriving your child of the ability, you're depriving your child of the opportunity to build a sense of mastery. And it's that sense of mastery that's going to carry him or her through life.
Well, let me ask you, so is this a demographic, a social area that you found in research that, or is it parents that are more successful parents have a tendency of wanting that? What did your research find in that?
Well, this is really very interesting. When I first started out doing this, when I was doing my research into why are kids experiencing more depression and anxiety and all these other disorders, I made the assumption, which turned out to be a faulty assumption. See, I failed, Chuck.
That's good, though.
To correct course. I made the erroneous assumption. Here I am living in New York City. I made the erroneous assumption that this was a phenomenon related to Northeast competition to get into elite universities. So the first phone call, literally the first phone call I made, was to the head of the Harvard Health Service. Now, it just happened to turn out that the guy who was head of the Harvard Health Service was also a psychiatrist and head of their campus counseling services. And I asked him, what about this? Now, he happened to know, and he disabused me of the idea that this was a phenomenon limited to the Northeast and to elite colleges. And he happened to know because he was on a listserv of all campus counseling center directors all over the country. And in fact, I threw out a query onto his listserv, which is how I got in touch with, so many respondents who responded to a query that I put out, and which is how was responsible for my first round of sources, from whom I got so much information. But in general, I would say it's a phenomenon all over the country. By the way, it's not limited to the United States, and I'll tell you a funny story about that. It is a phenomenon related to the middle class and above all over the country. And I would further define the middle class and above as, I would say it's restricted to, I would define middle class in this particular case as families where they know their child is going to go to college. Because all of this comes to a head in admission to college. So it's middle class and above. And why are these parents afraid and pushing their kids and keeping them from failing and restricting them from play? Because they're afraid. They know that we're living in a new world. They know that the tools that they use are not the tools that they grew up on, computers and all the technology. So they know the world has changed since they were kids. And they know that we live in a global environment. So they're terrified that their kids might not achieve the same socioeconomic level, which is why they're pushing their kids so much. But I discovered this isn't just a phenomenon in the United States. And because it relates globally to events on a global scale, and because it has so much to do with technology, it is a phenomenon in all countries that have that are in all high technology, westernized. I don't want to say westernized because it's more than westernized. It's in all countries that have a large segment of an educated and technologically advanced societies, is the way I put it. Now, in Sweden, we call these hothouse parents invasive parents. We call them helicopter parents. In Sweden, they call them curling parents from the sport of curling, where the parents sweep the ice in front of their kids.
Wow.
So it's a phenomenon there. You take a very big and mixed society like Brazil, where you have the poorest and the wealthiest, and it's very much a phenomenon in Brazil among the middle and upper middle, and higher classes. So it definitely exists pretty much globally.
So it's in the academic world, in psychology, that they're very much aware of this.
I would not. Yes, they're aware of it. There aren't a whole lot of studies being done. There are a few, and I talk about some of them in the book. And now people are beginning to look at the consequences. I don't think that. I don't think that people took this seriously as a threat to the performance of kids. I don't think that people took this seriously as a threat. Because I hate to say this, so much of academia is so politically correct that you don't look into the problems of the middle and the upper middle classes in some ways. I don't think people saw it. The problem is, Chuck, as you and I know, what this does is it weakens kids from the inside.
Absolutely.
It totally, and that's why I'm worried, because it's destroying them from the inside. I'm worried that it's actually weakening our culture in ways that we're not tuned into yet. That we don't need to fight wars. We've got something more pernicious going on where we're destroying our kids internally. That's why I think some of the screw-ups might be the kids who are going to save us, because these are the kids who just have never followed parental orders, and the parents have given up on them, so the kids are following their own muses and their own passions. And I think that these are the kids who might save us. But I don't think there's a whole lot of research being done on this because it isn't taken tremendously seriously. Everybody talks about it in academia. I can tell you I'm on a particular panel of an organization devoted to remedying some of the problems among university students. We get together, everybody tells stories about the parent who called the dean at 2 o'clock in the morning about the kids' laundry that didn't get done, and I mean, just absurd things. And everybody rolls their eyeballs. But I don't think too many people are sitting down and saying, wow, this is funny, but this is really corrosive to some essential part of the human character.
That is the reason I'm so high on people getting your book in their hands, because that information, as I was reading it, I was seeing it. I was seeing it in my life, in people that I was around and coaching, and everything that you were saying, I was seeing, and I was like, she has got information here that people need to see.
You know, Chuck, one of the most interesting things is that the first chorus of people responding to my book were coaches at every single level, from Yale University to and Notre Dame to Olympic coaches, by the way, at every level. Here's a story for you. I got called by not the coaches, the refs. You probably know this, that there's a crisis in referee land that can get referees to stay. Now, in the higher sports, their referees are paid. But at the lower level of sports and at the local level, referees aren't paid. They do it out of love. And love of the game and love of seeing kids develop. There's a crisis among the organization of referees. They can't keep refs for more than a couple of years. Why? Because parents don't like a call that goes against their child. They're in the referee's face. Referees have been followed out of arenas and harassed on highways, in parking lots. And this is all by parents who simply don't like the way a call affected their child.
And coaches know as well as anyone that to build an athlete, they're going to have to be able to handle adversity, handle bad calls, handle those situations, and you can't sit there and gripe about it. You've just got to respond rather than react.
Right.
That's the lesson coaches try to teach. But if parents are given a different message, it confuses the child, and they don't know how to respond.
Right. And I mean, kids do want to please their parents. They have to live with their parents every single day.
Absolutely. You know, and in closing, I know you're very busy, and I thank you so much for your time. But we've talked about the problem, and the problem that's been, and I also, in listening to you, it's something that we don't see on an immediate basis. It's a long-term situation. Then it comes to fruition when they go off to college. So you don't see it as a parent immediately. Correct?
No. The interesting thing is that these kids fall apart once they get out of the protective cocoon of the home and into college. They can't function for themselves. And actually, it's affecting the way they choose colleges. Many kids are choosing colleges and universities. There was a wonderful study done by 3 sociologists at Boston College called Getting In, a collective name for these 3 studies. And they discovered that kids are choosing colleges differently. They're choosing colleges that are closer to home in many cases. So, they can bring their laundry home and have their parents do their laundry, because laundry is too big a challenge to do on your own. You know that, don't you, Chuck?
Yes, I do know that.
Right.
My wife knows that for me.
Right. Well, we all wish we didn't have to do it, but,
Right.
you know,
It has to be done.
It's one of those little things in life. And they're moving closer to home, so if they got a runny nose, they could go home and subsist on mom's chicken soup, or mom's can of chicken soup. I mean, that's a very different way of looking at college and university. But yes, it's what happens. So you go off to school and mom isn't there to pick you up, to bring your papers to class if you left them home, to bring your book, to bring your uniform if you left it at home, and you fall apart when you get to college. That's why the colleges are seeing these huge rises in frequency of disorders.
And then are we seeing it bleed over into when they're applying for jobs? Are parents getting involved with the application of jobs?
I mean, that to me was some of the most unbelievable information that I uncovered. Parents are, well, here's sort of how it happens. You know, a lot of colleges have job fairs, so parents go to the job fairs. They let their kids sleep. And the kid doesn't have to go to the job fair. The parent goes to the job fair. I mean, this is just totally unheard of in prior times. The parents, instead of the child, goes to the job fair, collects information from about different companies, and gives this information to the kids. The kids bring their parents along on job interviews. That blew my mind. Let me tell you.
Say that again, because that is just hard for me to even comprehend.
Kids bring their parents into job interviews. I am telling you, Chuck, if a kid ever came here, a young person ever came here interviewing for a job with their parent, it would be automatic disqualification.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, I can understand a kid wanting their parent there, but it's the parent's job to turn around and coach the child on how to do it. You transfer the information to your child. You don't do it instead of your child doing it. You give your child the knowledge by coaching the child. Well, and I remember, I didn't have particularly warm, loving parents, but I remember calling my dad for information, and he would coach me on, well, you do this and you do that, and if they do this, you might want to say this. And that way you're transferring the ability to your child so they're not dependent on you. But the parents love the dependence that the kids have on them and create it. Imagine going to a job fair. Imagine saying, I'll go with you to your job interview. If the kid isn't smart enough to draw the boundary, certainly the parent should be smart enough to draw the boundary and say, hey, I can't do this. This is really a shameful thing to do. I'll coach it. Let's play different scenarios. And this way you're giving the kid the tools.
Yes.
But they're not doing that. And then they're also, so let's say you didn't bring your parent to the job interview, but you go home and you have your parent call and negotiate your salary for you. And you have your parent call, you get your first year review, and you have your parent call your boss because you don't like some of the things your boss said in the first year review. I am not making any of this up. I am getting this direct feedback from people on the front lines.
I'm speechless over that. That is just so you've talked, and we've got a mound of information that you have substantiated the problem. How do we fix it? How do we fix it?
I think it's pretty simple. I think parents have to see their job as coach. And instead of doing, begin to turn over the skills to their kids, transfer the skills to their kids, give them opportunities, small little opportunities to do things on their own, and to encourage them to do things on their own, and not make a big deal out of failure, but show them how to get themselves up, dust themselves off, and take another whack at whatever it is. So I think parents have to do that. I think they have to encourage their kids to go out and play with other kids. And parents are always social engineers, so they can take their kids to the playground. By the way, I'm sure you've noticed most playgrounds have been dumbed down considerably, although there's now a counter move to have more interesting, smarter playgrounds. But I know in my neighborhood, the wonderful playground that my kids grew up in that had moving parts no longer has any moving parts. Because of parental fears, reinforced with lawyers who are only too happy to hold the city liable for any broken bone or, anything they don't like. So I think parents need to back off. They need to encourage their kids. They need to turn over to their kids more opportunities to do things. I think they need to have some confidence that their kids are far more capable than they're giving the kids credit for. And I think they have to cut back on the cell phone contact with their kids. And it was always the case as a parent. You let your kid ride the bike, you let your kid go to the first day of school on his own, and you held your breath, you bit your tongue, and you just have to do that. I'm sorry. I think the parents have to suck up some more and take more of the emotional responsibility and not dump it all on their kids.
That is, the truer words haven't been spoken. That's some great wisdom that you offered there. I would like to share with you some things that I see. I see in young people that they're scheduled so much in lessons to be performed at a young age. Texas is a big sports state.
Right.
And so I talk to parents that believe a lot of the things that you're talking about, that they need to pull back, but they're fearful that if my kid doesn't get involved at 4 or 5 years old, they won't be able to make the high school team. They won't be able to. So they're
Right.
scheduling them out of fear. And I try to calm them and go, let them be. They'll be just fine.
Right.
I've seen the experience. You can let them start at a later age and they'll be fine. Because I see kids burn out by the time they get to high school if they're overscheduled. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And, physicians are seeing kids with all kinds of repetitive injuries that they never saw before except in aged professional athletes at the end of their careers. And now they're seeing them in 10-year-old kids. whose parents have them out in the back throwing a baseball all night long, with big lights set up and pushing their kids to perform. And the other thing is, Chuck, and I have to say, maybe I did this as a mistake. I'll accept it. But one time I was speaking, will not publicize the name of the city where I was speaking, but I gave a great speech one night, and the next day I spoke to a wider audience, they were harping on me about this idea of their kids being on this athletic track, where you have to play at an early age, and if you don't get on this team, then you won't make the travel team, and if you're not on the travel team, you won't qualify for getting on the high school team. And the parents were just pushing, and the really bad consequence of that in most cases is that if your kid is on a travel team, you may not like what I'm going to have to say, but if your kid is on a travel team, often, not always, but very often the whole family schedule has to revolve around that travel team. And so the kid becomes the center of the family, which I think is a very bad idea. I've said to parents, look, you have to make a value judgment. What you think is important here, because family dinner together teaches kids an awful lot of things and has tremendous value. Pushing your kid to be on the travel team, I said, well, and I actually said this, Chuck, I said, well, let's face it, guys, most of your kids are not going to be professional athletes. And they were offended. And of course it's true. None of their kids would be professional athletes. But the idea, that the parents had to make up their mind, had to sit and wrestle with their own values and say, well, in my particular family, in my particular case, what is the value to the child? And in that evaluation, you're also in some ways assessing the skill level of your child, versus what is the child going to get out of these other experiences. I can't make that decision for any family. So I told families, this is how you have to, these are the things you need to weigh and how you have to make the decision. But I did point out to them that it was highly unlikely that any of their kids would be professional athletes, and they should consider that, in evaluating the needs here. Didn't go over too well. Didn't make me terribly popular with that crowd.
That's okay. It was the truth, though. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth. In closing, would you share that you shared with me yesterday a story about a group you talked to in Connecticut? And I thought that to be a fabulous, insightful story.
Oh, yeah. I was speaking at a private school in Connecticut. It was Parents' Weekend. Parents had come from all over the country. I was a guest at the home of one of the administrators, and her home several miles from the school. And as we were driving to the school where I was going to give a talk, the administrator was regaling me with stories about the parents and the school and the sort of the atmosphere and the kinds of kids who go there and the kinds of problems that they have and why they were inviting me up there. And she happened to mention that there was one particular kid who was experiencing problems on a number of fronts that came directly from his interactions with his parents, and his parents were really kind of very hard to deal with and were really creating a lot of problems for this kid. And they were highly invasive and had their own ideas of what their kid should be like. So I give my talk, the audience was wonderful and very attentive. It's a very big auditorium because it was an auditorium for theatrical performances, and it being a private school, it was just a fabulous facility. And it was also used regionally for performances. So it was really this big auditorium and a huge stage. And I'm on a lectern in the middle of the stage, and I finished my talk, and I love doing Q&A with the audience, and the first question, hand shoots up right from the second row, and a father asked me, well, more or less tells me he has a son, his son's in high school, isn't it too late to make any changes? It sort of took my breath away for a second. I'm a parent. It's never too late to make changes. A course correction. Think of it as sailing. You make course corrections before you crash. And I sort of folded my arms and I walked to the front of the stage, and it gave me a moment to think after I caught my breath. And I said to him, look, let's think of it in business terms. If you were running a business and your business was running into problems, do you tell me that you would just let it fail, that you wouldn't do anything, you just throw up your hands? Or would you take steps to analyze the problem and change course and do what you can? And I thought the audience was unusually silent. And apparently the message sunk into this guy. And I learned later that this was the problem parent that the administrator had told me about. And they were all kind of floored. Not that he asked the question, but that I was floored and yet was able to address him in terms that didn't bring blame on him, but put it in terms that perhaps he could understand in objective terms. So hopefully I did something to help this kid there.
Absolutely, and that story really touched me because you did a magnificent job of not placing blame on someone, but trying to help them to understand. And I think too, parents want what's best for their kids. They're just going about it the wrong way.
They're going about it the wrong way, and they're putting their own emotional needs ahead of their kids' developmental needs.
Yes, yes. Well, you have been so kind and gracious to give us your time. Would you consider coming out to Texas sometime? A lot of school administrators will be listening to this, so would you consider? We don't all wear cowboy hats and ride horses, so I don't know if you'd consider coming out to Texas.
I've been to Texas before.
Okay. So we would treat you kindly, but if someone wanted to contact you about coming out and speaking to their group,
I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. I've spoken all across the country. I'm trying to think, I've been to Texas. I'm not sure that I've spoken. Chuck, I have spoken so many places in the last 6 years, really all over the country. I can't specifically remember whether I've spoken in Texas. Maybe I have. Maybe I haven't. I can't remember. Actually.
Well, the people need to hear you in person as well. Would contacting you by email be the best way to contact you?
Best way to contact me. Same way you did.
Okay. And I will also put a link on my website for Nation of Wimps, and they need to get the book. They need to get the book and read it ASAP because it's fabulous.
Great.
Have you got a part 2 coming out?
I'm following the phenomenon. I hoped, this is, I hope that the recession in 2008, I was hoping that that in some way would be a corrective for some of the things that were going on, and it didn't turn out that way. It's really only worse. What I do think is happening is there's increasing interest in play. Now, that may be a way through which some things are corrected, but not everything is being corrected. And I do follow this. So I think that parents, well, I'm onto some ideas that may eventually work into a part two. The idea of parents, sorry for the sirens, it's
That's
New
okay.
York City. No, the building isn't burning. But that parents in general overestimate the influence that they have on their kids to determine what their kids are. They can ruin their kids. They can dampen their kids and give their kids anxieties and set them up so they're experiencing depression. But parents really aren't going to aren't responsible for 100% of how the kids turn out. And parents need to know that there are other influences in life, and the parents need to provide room for those influences to work.
Well said. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
And I look forward to talking to you again. Please have a Merry Christmas.
you too.
Okay.
And if you're ever in New York, I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. I would love to contact you if we're up there.
Okay. And
Okay.
now I'll turn this thing off somehow.
I will as well. So
Okay.
have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.